I'm going to present the next speaker. My friend, and it's a funny story. I've actually known Eric for a lot of years, and even knew of him before I was in Australia. So, Eric is the CEO of the International Car Wash Association, based out of Chicago, Illinois. And I suppose I should also say in charge of the organization that is the best at putting on car wash events around the world. And as a result of that is a fantastic repository of knowledge and trends. And he's going to give a little bit of information about what's going on in a lot of those markets at a macro level. Some things that I think you'll find very interesting we haven't seen here yet. Welcome up to the stage, Eric Wulf.
If I can beg just a minute to get the PowerPoint rolling. Thank you. Good morning. I'm sorry you're going to have two American tongues back to back. That's cruel and unusual punishment, and my apologies. But thanks for the introduction, Craig. Thanks for the chance to be here. I was here 2 years ago and always happy to come back on this quick little jaunt down to Australia. We too are very excited, I'll say, about the possibility of working more collaboratively, the ICA and ACWA. And so we're encouraged by it, we're excited about it, and hopefully next year things are even better. So thanks for the opportunity to do that. I have been allotted 20 minutes to provide a global overview on car washing. So this is going to be a highly edited version, but what I'll hope to do in the next 20 minutes or so is give you a look at some of the information we have. A lot of it will be North American and European. I'll have some of our more recent consumer study data that I'll go through, and then I'll kind of end it with, beyond just here's a profile of the industry, I'm going to end it with some trends and what I think could be some potential disruptors for the car wash business. Disrupt doesn't, by the way, necessarily mean bad in the end, so I hope not to bring you to tears. I think there's lots of points of light to be excited about. But I think we're at a time, like Craig said, a bit of a lot of change. And it's not just in our industry, but also it's even transportation and cars. It's all changing. And so I'll talk about that a little bit. So here you go, the world in 20 minutes, at least as best that Eric Wulf knows of it. Let's see, is this, here we go. Okay, so the prerequisite, of course, is, so where are you going to talk about car washing? Well, you have to be talking about places where there's cars. And so one is you look at automobile rates, and then you look at personal income. So these darker colored countries, are essentially, of course, then precisely where you find professional car washing. And we would sort of organize then, let's say, the globe into two buckets. One would be growth and emerging markets, established markets. And that could be, by the way, an established market doesn't mean that there's not change going on within it. And so as we talk about Europe and North America in a minute as an example, they're established markets in terms of the total number of retail sites, you might say, but there's things happening within those numbers, right? So North America, Western Europe, Australia, Japan, I might call the more mature established markets. And the emerging markets then would be Eastern Europe, Middle East, China, India. Eastern Europe, you might include perhaps in there Southern Europe, the difference being essentially from Germany to the west, or from, let's say, Austria to the north, something like that would be the much more mature part, the old Western European alliance sort of economies. But certainly when I say Eastern Europe, the best examples of that would be, an emerging market would be Poland, with some tremendous growth rates on car wash installations, new democracies, newly capitalistic countries. In the growth and established markets, we estimate somewhere around 170,000 retail sites. Retail site would mean self-service, conveyor, rollover in-bay. It would not include things like auto dealerships. It would not include rental car facilities. It would not include fleet wash installations. So from a supplier perspective, the world is even bigger than this 170,000. This is merely talking about retail on the street car washing. Emerging markets, as Craig said, it's kind of like shake your head, or scratch your head. We don't know, candidly, what enough of that world looks like in terms of installation size. So here are some of the things happening within those, within those established markets. There's some change underway. One is in Europe. Europe and particularly the US, and I'm going to break out the US from North America from Canada, really is what I'll compare it to. The Canadian market is very much like the European market in the context of petrol versus independence. Gas station car washes, predominantly rollovers, versus independent sites, more often can be conveyor, in-bay, or self-serve. And so in Europe, you look at least 2/3 of the market is going to be car washes are in conjunction with a gas retailing environment. Convenience store possibly, but definitely with gas. By and large, particularly in mature Europe, what you're seeing is a slowdown, if not actually a decrease in the number of petrol stations. For example, in Germany, actually, there's substantially less petrol stations in Germany now than there were 10 years ago. And as you look out, you look at mileage, the efficiency of vehicles, you look at electric vehicles, other fuel sources, and so the number of petrol stations we expect to remain trending slowly downward. So what you're seeing from a car wash perspective is the growing importance of private investor sites, entrepreneurial sites. Oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes those in Europe will involve the conveyor segment, certainly self-serve, and some of the rollover and the in-bay automatic, particularly in Eastern Europe, some of the in-bay automatic. But what you're really seeing, again, the macro, I would say, is this slow but steady. We feel confident about the trajectory. It's the velocity that no one knows exactly, the speed of this. But you're absolutely seeing a move toward conveyorized car washing, or even more generally, private entrepreneurs coming into the business is new. Again, 10, 15 years ago, it's all, I'm going to say in general terms, it's all petrol tender offers for equipment. It's all driven by major oil, and it's not that case any longer. And then in North America, I'll talk about this in a moment, dive into it a little bit more, particularly in the United States, the M&A activity, so merger and acquisitions, that also involves just new capital coming into the industry. It has been, and I'm seeing lots of American faces in the crowd, but I think from what I've heard, I haven't been in the industry forever, only since 2006. The last 4 or 5 years for operators and for suppliers are maybe the best 4 or 5 years the industry has ever seen since it began. It's just been an incredible time that we hope lasts at least a little while longer. Okay, so what I'll show you now is, and by the way, this is a great example, Craig, of something maybe down the road that in the 2018 show or the 2020 show in Melbourne or wherever we might be, it'd be great to have an Australian consumer study. We don't have that yet, but here's what I can share with you. This year, we did our first European consumer study. We've been doing this in the US since the mid-1990s. Every 2 or 3 years, we go out and we ask motorists, you have to own a car to get in to the survey, about their impressions of car washing and their habits, et cetera, et cetera. So now what we have is Europe and US. When I say Europe, it's 6 country total. We looked at 6 distinct markets. There's a full study available, like 500 pages literally of information. This is not that, but it gives us a good indication. We go from the Nordics down to Italy, we go Poland all the way over to France, including Germany and Netherlands. So it's a good representative sample, we think. Here's an example of what a mature market would look like. It's a high wash market. So 95, 96% of consumers wash their cars. Another example of a very mature, strong market would be, do you do it professionally or DIY? DIY being do it yourself. So 85% and 80% professional car washing. The reason, by the way, this adds up to more than 100 is because you can do both. You can switch. So in the US, there's much more switching. You do it professionally and yourself. Europe, it's much more common to be one or the other, which you see represented here. So which do you do more often, professionally or DIY? Again, mature markets, Europe, US, much more, and the US trend, by the way, consistently is moving toward this direction of pro most frequently. When we first began this survey back in 1994, that figure would have been around 47%. So less than half of Americans would most frequently visit a professional car wash. Much more common to go do it themselves. Okay, another interesting, while both mature, here's some examples of differences between the markets. Again, Australia would be so cool to have in this sample. Or Craig can just tell me the answers, I guess, if we can't do the actual study. But here's what I will highlight for you is the real differences you see between Europe and US, although very pro markets, is going to be this at the margin of high frequency, more Americans washing more frequently than Europeans. So, and it varies by country, but generally speaking, whereas Europe has more people who wash only at a professional car wash than the US, in the US, at the high rates, more Americans will wash more frequently than Europeans. And where that comes into play, and this is an estimation, by the way, based on these responses, our best guesses of frequency of washing is in the US around 10.5, sorry, in Europe around 10.5 times per year, and in the US a little over 1 time per month, so 13.6 times per year. By the way, note, this is self-reported, right? We're not tagging cars and following people yet. So this is an estimation. Typically, our belief is people overestimate how much they wash. Substantially is our estimation, but that this is the best available information. It's what people think they're doing, which is also interesting. Did I? Okay. Here's it. This is kind of interesting. Again, the differences by country. I mentioned to you before the strength of pro only in Europe. We'll look at Germany, kind of as you'd expect, right? The German culture of automobiles. Germany has the highest percentage in our survey sample of people who only go to a professional car wash, do not do it themselves. Some of you might be familiar that in several of the regions of Germany, in fact, it's illegal to wash at home, wash yourself. Not everywhere, but in several areas it is. And then you look at another thing that stands out is the amount of switchers is the Polish market, where it is both professional and do-it-yourself, a little bit more like the US market, certainly compared to Germany. Okay, so that's some basic consumer stuff. Let me talk about the merger and acquisitions activity in the US that I mentioned a few minutes ago. Left-hand side retail, right-hand side supply. What I've listed on here is both the acquirers and those who have been acquired over the last few years. It's not necessarily, what I would highlight, it's not necessarily from a total percentage of the market yet overwhelming. It is, though, certainly very unique and unprecedented. And so what do I mean by that? So these 4 car wash chains here on the left-hand side, IMO, of course, you'd be familiar with here in Australia, who have operations based out of the UK. In fact, interestingly enough, they're moving their global headquarters from outside of London to Denver, Colorado. As they look at growth opportunities, they have been one of the 2 most active acquirers in the US. In fact, within 2 years, they're the 2nd or 3rd largest car wash chain conveyor in the US. Quickly have become a major player. If you take all of those together, you're looking at, if you take all of the consolidators, acquirers over the last 2 or 3 years, you're talking about certainly less than 1,000 conveyors. And by the way, I'm going to speak to conveyors more frequently on this because that's typically where the M&A is happening with the conveyor segment, the tunnels. So we guesstimate something like 25,000 tunnels in the US, somewhere around that number. So it is still a highly fragmented industry. The average car wash operator has still 1 or 2 stores, maybe 3 stores, but the average is going up, and at the extremes you're seeing much larger numbers. So the largest single operator of tunnels in the US is Mr. Car Wash, around, I don't know, as of this morning, 240s, something like that. But you only have maybe 4 or 5 organizations that are over 100. So it drops down pretty dramatically. And by the way, let's see, Mr. Car Wash, IMO's been recapped, is in the process of being recapitalized. Zips with their structure, and Quick Quack. What's also different about these organizations is private equity money or private investment money, and that's been unusual for the car wash business previously. And then on the right-hand side, you see on the supply some of the acquisitions or mergers that have happened recently. You know, the Ryco and McNeil coming together a few years ago, Sonny's acquiring Diamond Shine, a chemical company, quite recently, also partnering with a private equity firm. Again, all of these really are in the last handful of years, and still is a total of the market, small, but it's unique and unprecedented for car wash that, again, professional money is coming into the industry. By the way, the good and the bad of this, I would say, because this is always, I think, particularly for operators, like, what does that mean? Is it good or bad? Is it all going to be private equity, or am I going to get taken over? I think, keep in mind, one of the things that we think is positive about the private equity money coming in is that, A, it provides operators with an exit strategy that didn't exist before. There's a lot of checkbooks right now walking the streets of the US looking to buy washes. And then number two is, the more of these transactions that happen that get publicly reported, even though it's private equity, it gets reported, it makes the industry more reputable. For commercial lending. So even for you wanting to go to the bank and expand your own business, it's typically been seen as a positive. Okay, I'm going to move toward the latter half. Would you please signal me if I'm running too far, Craig? I'm losing my clock here. So let me end, though, on these three growth stages. And I think maybe there's some aspects of what we've seen, the evolution in the US, that might match Australia, maybe not, but here I'll share with you what we call modern growth stages. So keep in mind, where do these dates come from? Well, they're out of my head. This isn't yet written in any textbook or business case study. This is kind of our reckoning of what's been happening. But as we think about the modern growth stages in the industry, an industry that still only began in the 1950s, essentially, really, grew up in the 1960s, we'll call the modern explosion to begin around 2000. And in the United States, the modern explosion in 2000 began with the express exterior concept. It really began by an American operator who took a lot of European ideas and applied it to his business down in Louisiana. And so it was the explosion of express exterior. The other parts of what made this period 2000 to 2015 so powerful is, of course, speed, price, and quality. That's the proposition generally of the express exterior, but also I think it caused in-bay automatic folks, self-service people to up their game because customer expectations got higher. The march from DIY to do it for me, we talked about the consumer study we've seen was less than 50% professional. Now it's up toward 2/3 professional. That was continuing. I think we have seen in the United States that the concept of whether a market is full or not has changed. How many stores a market can support has changed. Now, that being said, every operator will tell you if there's one car wash in a town that they own, that's all that there needs to be there. We're full, thanks. You don't keep going down the road. But there's lots of examples in the US of where the metrics for, well, this market is saturated, this market has enough car washes. I think those expectations have changed quite dramatically. There is simply just more demand. There is more consumption of car washing going on in the US. And I think it's fueled by those top three. More frequency, higher quality begets more demand, begets more stores. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that there is an unlimited ability to add car washes. Of course, there's a risk in oversaturation. But I think really the metrics have changed quite dramatically. Store scalability also drove a lot of demand, meaning low labor models and the use of technology allows you to have more stores and manage them more efficiently than, as an example, full service, which can be really challenging to manage with number of employees. And the labor and operational efficiencies. That drove what I'll call stage one. Stage two, we'll call this the move from great operators to great retailers. So when I came into the industry around 2006 and you'd ask, well, who are the best car washers? Who should we go see? The moniker they would always get is, well, go see Vic. He's a great operator. And oftentimes that almost had a connection to the operational, the tactical, the design, the grease monkey, right? Likes to get in there and make the operation run perfectly. And obviously it's important. You have to process cars and get them clean. But I think we're in this move now toward great retailing, which is a different animal, which speaks to the appearance of the site, which speaks to the marketability of it, which speaks to customer experience, things that we haven't thought as much about previously. So what's happening in this time also, I mentioned the private equity and the professional investors, the consolidation and the M&A that's happening right now, outside expertise in retail, design, marketing has significantly improved, and then the real big one of late has been monthly unlimited plans. And this could be a whole nother topic, and I'm sure there'll be others who talk about this, but the idea of having a recurring revenue stream for your car wash by charging a pretty aggressive multiple on your base price and then hitting a credit card every 30 days to annuitize almost that business and even out cash flow and protect yourself against weather has truly changed the game in the United States. For the major multi-store operators, this is the #1 marketing focus that they have with their operations. How do I get more monthly customers? It's the #1 goal. All right, and then stage 3 that I'll end on here is, I think, this transportation upheaval. Here's what I think is, who knows how long this lasts, who knows how this ends, but here's the 3 things on our mind: this transportation business models, automotive technology, and then in the end, the consumer behavior, how they use those things. So what do I mean by that? You can tell I'm speeding up my speech, I'm sorry. Different business models of transportation. So I'll introduce some names to you if you're not familiar. Clutch, Drive, and Turo. Clutch is an independent company based out of Atlanta, Georgia. Drive is by Cadillac brand. And Turo is, I think, West Coast, San Francisco area based. The first 2 are subscriptions for cars. You don't own a car. You pay a price, and the price points might be $750 a month to $1,100 a month. You pay a fee that allows you access to vehicles from a smorgasbord of options. So if you want an SUV one week, that's fine. Next month, you want to have a convertible because the weather's getting nice, you trade out. You touch it on your app, they deliver the car to your driveway, clean, gassed, and insured. You don't have to handle any of that. So, really interesting. Clutch is multi-brand. Cadillac is within the Cadillac family of vehicles. Really interesting to think about not owning a car, but merely subscribing to it like you might Netflix. Turo is like Airbnb for vehicles. They'll come in and install a box under your dash that'll allow people to, when your car is idle, access it via a mobile app. They can find where your car is parked, they can get into it, they can turn it on, and they can drive it around. And you can monetize your car for the 98% that it sits idle typically, at least in the US, every day. So wow, what will that do? Autonomous vehicles, what's interesting about that besides it's fascinating to think about? Well, what could that do for site location with car washing? So if the car can go anywhere to get itself clean by itself, the best time to do that will be at night when you're sleeping, right? I would think. And if it can get there by itself, and particularly if fuel costs go to near zero because it can plug in and charge itself, where can it go? Anywhere. Where do you want it to be going if you're the operator who owns the car wash? To the cheapest piece of dirt you can find that it can reach. You don't invest in landscaping, you don't invest in the building, you don't invest in the marketing, other than having a facility that can process cars at night and do a good job and let them arrive back home before the owner wakes up. Fascinating. Fleet sales, connected to the top one. So what can we as an industry do to connect ourselves, make ourselves visible to those organizations to get the cars washed? And then capacity utilization just speaks to, particularly with autonomous vehicles, one of the challenges of car washes is, of course, you've got to build enough of a facility to handle peak demand days, but most of the time you operate well below capacity utilization, right? So if more of that volume goes to a 24-hour kind of model or an overnight model, that could change your construction requirements. That could change your processing requirements. That would make a possibly more efficient business. Last couple on disruption. Hydrophobic coatings. Is anyone familiar with hydrophobic coatings? Are you familiar? So if you don't want to sleep one night, Google hydrophobic coatings. It'll scare the bejesus out of you. If they put these on cars and they remain durable and affordable or become durable and affordable, it could really change the game for car washing. Hydrophobic is water-fearing. This would be coatings that can be applied to nearly anything. They're experimenting with them on clothes. Most recently, in March of this year, the University of Michigan came out with a new technology they believe is now durable because the molecular structure has not been thus far. If it gets pierced by a rock or something or bird droppings, it breaks down. They believe they have found a version that is durable and affordable, and their vision is to use them on ocean freighters. Because if you can coat the freighter with hydrophobic materials, it cuts through the water and drops your fuel costs. If that comes to car washing, if water jumps away from the car and the dirt with it, well, let's move on. And then finally, right to clean. Those of you who are in the oil change industry might be aware of this idea of right to repair or auto repair shops. Proprietary technologies, I think we as an industry have to be very aware of as technology gets more and more advanced. Our car washes may have to be approved or fit the specs and specifications of the manufacturers on our equipment. So I can see the possibility of a day where General Motors says you can only get your car washed at a GM certified car wash, which may also be the dealer, because of the technology involved. The automatic transmissions, the sensors, the variety of things we're having trouble with, at least in the States, on processing cars. We're going to have to be able to maintain our ability to independently wash cars. Okay, as I'm 2 slides. So my theme would be on all these disruptors and with automotive technology is we as an industry need to think of our 2 customers. So one is the customer we've typically spoken to, the human being, and what he or she wants and desires and their price points and their marketing experience and maximize that. The second, though, is increasingly I think we're going to need to be marketing to the car. The car is going to start making choices. The car is going to be informed by Siri or Alexa or whomever about where the best car wash is and what the best prices are and what the wait time might be and how quickly it can get to it. And if we're not visible to the vehicle, and if we're not compelling to the vehicle will choose to go somewhere else. So we're doubling the points at which we need to market to. Okay, all that being said, I'm going to end it with this quote. I found this in our archives back in the office in Chicago back from 1984. There was an ICA president who stood up at the 1984 convention and said this. And it talked about looking into the future, seeing supersonic laser rays, which given that lasers are the speed of light, I don't know where supersonic augments that at all, but that's what they thought. Supersonic laser rays removing dirt and moving cars on hydrofoils through the building. So that being said, there's a very good chance that 20 years from now, someone else will stand up with my job and give you their view of the future that's totally way off too. So make your investment decisions accordingly. With that, sorry for the speed of my speech. I hope it was digestible. Thank you very much for having me here.
I think we all agree that that was an absolutely magic speech, Eric, and I'm glad you had some extra time starting early because it was scary, it was fascinating, and it's given you all a lot to think about. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you.